All right, going to take a look at the mechanics of creating a database with many-to-many relationships or with just relationships. And I'm going to use SQL Server Management Studio. I think MySQL Workbench has similar tools. It's not that good at it, and we can always port it over. We'll look at that in another episode or something. But just going to show you how SQL Server Management Studio makes some of this easy. We should know that we could do this all with SQL, create the tables and create then the foreign key constraints, just using SQL, and that's good. For me, creating a database happens once in the lifetime. So, unlike querying, where getting good with a SQL will make us productive in a day-to-day basis, where maybe we're using a tool and got to grab some records, and knowing that select query SQL is important to be able to code it. Setting up the database, sometimes it's nice to lean on a tool that makes that a little bit handy. So, we're trying to implement this, and I've asked you to implement this exact same database for yourself. It's out of the book. I think it's pretty clear. You have donors that are people. You have years, okay, individual years, and maybe a goal for what this institution wants to collect. And we have gifts from donors in particular years of a particular amount. So a donor contributes once a year, but contribute many times, perhaps in different years. A year hopefully gets gifts from lots of donors. And what we want to, and we have some information that goes along with that. And we just want to put this database and make it a physical instantiation of it. First thing, so I'm up here in SQL Server Management Studio in our VM. It doesn't have to be in our VM as long as it's SQL Server Management Studio. One thing you want to do first off, so we have the capability to develop and work with diagrams directly in SQL Server, and it will then make the database based on what our diagram looks like. One thing we have to do before that really works is go to Tools, Options, Designers, Table and Database Designers, and uncheck this Prevent Saving Changes that would require table recreation. So we want to give, when we're working in the designer, the power, if we change the picture, then SQL Server will change the database. I'm not saying that that's always or SQL Server Management Studio will generate the SQL that will tell the database, will change the database within SQL Server. I'm not saying that's the way you always want to go. Sometimes, maybe you want to prevent that. We've got a good production database. We're just looking at a diagram. We don't want to accidentally, have something that we didn't intend changed. But for our purposes here, and I think everything that we do in this class for this course, we would like that to be the case, and you know enough how to create a new database. Remember, please prefix this with your student ID. I think it's called donations, maybe donation. I like plural sometimes. I know it's singular supposedly, and some people are very adamant about that. Everything is, I think of years and gifts rather than year and gifts. We'll follow their thing, but that's just naming a database, and in it goes, and there it is. And I'm going to click open on this and click here on new database diagram. Now, the first time you do this, it's going to come, this database does not have one or more of the support objects. You'll say yes. We want to create the objects. I'll close that property window. It's actually here, I'll close that just because you might not get that property window coming up, but I'll show you how to get it later. Okay, so now we have a blank slate for making a diagram. If I click here, what I did was close that pop-up. It wanted to add tables. First of all, add tables would take tables that I've already created and put them on the palette here. So if I click add table, I'll get back to where I was. Well, I really don't have any tables to add, right? So there's that. What I want to do is I can use this designer to make a new table. So I've clicked on new table, and this is where it gets good. I can look at this. Oh, the table name that I want to create, I'm not going to do it all uppercase. I'm just looking at the design over here. Oh, by the way, in the design, the pound sign, I don't like it, but we'll follow it, is actually part of the name for the attribute, year number. Okay. What to me it confuses, whereas the asterisk is notation that says that that year is, number is the primary key. So I don't, I would call it year no if I were doing it. We'll follow theirs. But but it almost makes you think that means something, like the plus means something, the star means something. This is just part of the name. But what's nice is I can really just go from the design. I'll enter a name for this table, and we're going to call it year, and it goes okay, and then it puts me right into defining some of the columns, and I have those available, and year number. Uh, I say down here later, numeric fields, we're going to get to a phone number. We don't have zip code or SSN, but identifier kinds of numbers that you're not going to calculate with are probably best as character types. Things like a leading zero on a zip code. If you said, "Oh, make zip code an integer," and you can always validate, that you have all digits and that kind of thing. To me, year in that regard is on a borderline, whether I wanted maybe 4 characters. Or making an integer. I'm going to go ahead and make an integer in case we calculate the difference between one year and the next. But like that. Oh, by the way, we remember that if we right click here, we can set that as the primary key. So, okay, that's what that asterisk means. And we have year, goal, and, SQL Server, but not MySQL has a money variable, and they've got small money. Money goes way, way up. So we can make, since we're in SQL Server, we can make it money. We could also use decimal 10. I've got an assumption down here that says, okay, we don't need to worry if, that more than, or up to $10 billion. Money goes way more than that. I was looking it up. So if you're in SQL Server and you have a money field, I recommend money. It will just work a little better. If not, that's the same thing as a decimal. And it doesn't say whether that's a required field or not. I think we'll make all our fields required. These are good questions to go back in real life and then ask the client or have, something, but does it make sense if you're a charity and you are having a goal to have a year, without a goal? So this says you can't add a record to year without that. And if I click save, well, it's going to save the diagram. I always call my diagrams of the whole thing ERD for entity relationship diagram, but that did a couple of things. That not only saved the diagram that I am working on here, but it also, if I go down here, it created this table and for me, and so I didn't have to even just kind of think about that. If I right click on the table, there's also, I think, we can get its properties. I thought there was table view. We'll get to properties. So if we just, that's standard view. If I just kind of wanted to simplify, just get something that, just showed me it remembers the other stuff, column names, that's a little bit more just like this. And okay, who cares right now about the column types? One of the things is you have to come up with a type for the column to save the table and move on. You just, if you're just working, you say, gosh, I am not there yet. You can make things like varchar 50 and go back later and change the types. I was just getting the right types, but I'm going to use this standard so we're reminded of the types because it's a little bit important. Okay, so let's see if we can do the same thing. I'm right clicking, and remember, it's not add table. Seems like add table. Add table would bring in a table we already have exists. It's a new table. This one's donor, work. The idea of SSMS and MySQL Workbench and many tools like them is to make this stuff easy. And donor number is going to be a primary key. Click over on there, set primary key. I'm going to show off a little bit of something here. I'm right clicking now and getting properties. So you can get properties. And so we were talking about properties of the donor number. So this is going to be like the ID of the donor. And we could come up and make a different integer for every donor. Built into a relational or SQL-based database. I'm looking at this is properties of the donor column, you can make that column what's called an identity specification. I have to come down on this line and say yes. And what that does is say, okay, the database is going to generate the donor number for you automatically. It's going to start at 1, that's the seed, and increment by 1 every 1. You can change the seed and the increment. No real reason. This is not something that you should use really to identify the donor in the terms of tell the donor, oh, your donor number is this. This is more of an internal kind of a record ID that the system will use to keep going. One thing I liked about Access lets you make this random. So you just get, because too many people, like you get donor 1, donor 2, donor 3, then you delete donor 2, and it doesn't reuse 2. Marks it, it'll go to 4, and people say, well, I want it to go 1, 2, 3. And I say, no, you don't. These are just guaranteed to be a different number for every donor, and that's what it does. You don't have to worry about coming up with it yourself. Okay, so you don't have to make it an identity, but I did, and that's the same thing as an identifier, though typically we do identity columns, with this automatic numbering for an identifier where we just want some unique key. Here, year is not going to repeat. This just makes sure that different donors get a different ID. Okay, and you can only have one identity column per table, and that makes a little sense. You can't think of a reason you'd want more than one. My standard is, and we're not going to allow that for things like names. Start with varchar 50 if you have a good reason. To, kind of, oh gosh, we have really long names or something, and it may be longer, maybe 100 would be a better in general. The nice thing about varchar, and we aren't getting so subtle that all the data types matter, but it's interesting. Varchar varies how much space gets set aside for these attributes, whereas a car sets aside the full amount. And so even if you don't have a name that long, things will be hunky-dory. Just this is another kind of fact I want to get here. Notice as I click things, I get the properties of that. There is the possibility for great to identify a default value. Okay, so I've required first name. There was one person who applied for a position and had as the first name FNU, this and that. It's for first name unknown. They were a one-named person, but everything asked for a first name. So what this does is if we don't provide a first name, we'll put FNU in there, all caps. Don't know if that's a good idea or not, but just demonstrating some of the subtle things that a database can do. If we were deep into database programming, we would get more of this. We're more of used to the modeling database appreciation in this course, and so that's it. As I kind of said before, I would use a car for this, and I said it's okay to assume we have these 10-digit US numbers in real life, or depending on the situation, there might be something else going on there that we would want, but we're just trying to do something. All right, and we're going to make everything required is what I said. So if I save this now, it's going to warn, say, oh, to save this is going to change the donor table. And yes, you can make that warning go away if you want, but it doesn't take much. And just tidying that up a little bit. Okay, great. So that was easy enough. Those are straightforward tables. We know we need another new table here. And it's going to be gift. All right, now one thing that we know from the notation is that the identifier for gift is going to be year number and donor number. And these need to be the same type. This is going to be kind of a foreign key pointed back to here, and donor number is going to be a foreign key pointed back to here. So it's important they get the same type if they're pointing, or at least a compatible type. Like a car can go to a var car and like that, but here it's int to int. And I'd like both of those together to be the primary key. So what I did was I kind of highlighted one and then pressed shift or control and got the other to get them both. I don't know if you swipe it. If you try to swipe it, I think it goes. You can highlight one and now it's got the, so you can highlight one and press control to get the other in case there's some separation. Highlighting one and pressing shift, then another gets the first and everything in between. The control gets them just separately. But now I can right click and set primary key. And what we have is both of those together are the key, not two primary keys, but the combination of year and donor are the primary key, and we have an amount that the person's doing, and make it money or that decimal, and allow nulls not. All right, so making these tables, I'm going to go ahead and save that now, and it's going to warn me, okay, up, canceled, because let's see, can I change that table name here? I never did look at it. Yeah, I can come over here to properties. So I never, and there might have been a way to do it in here. There we go, gift. All right, so that's good, but we don't have any of the relationships yet. Okay, there's nothing that guarantees that when a particular donor makes a donation, it will go to a particular year, or that it's tied to a particular donor. Let me do that. I'm going to just make this a little bigger to give myself a little more real estate, and show how this goes. All right, so these are going to be these foreign key relationships. What I like to do, if you take, kind of grab on a field and drop it on the table you're going to, it usually makes a pretty good guess about what you're trying to do. It comes up with a name for that foreign relationship or foreign key relationship, FK, gift to year. Okay, and you could change it here if you wanted something else. I usually don't. The one table is going to have as a primary key the thing. So it's saying, okay, I think you mean the primary key in year, and the table with the foreign key, I think you mean is gift. So this one it's kind of got it right. And there are some properties of this. We'll probably just say okay. On these, sometimes there's reasons to change them. If there was existing data, do you want to check the data? Do we want to look kind of at the details here? There's the thing, well, what to do about if you update a year number, change a year number or donor ID? Do you want a cascade? I would just accept the defaults. And so presto changeo, we got this one to many. This looks like an infinity. So that's many. And that kind of key is a one. So we have that one to many relationship coming in there for free. And so work. And if I kind of do it this way, it makes the right guess. We have a primary key table donor, and we have a foreign key table with the same column. Okay, and if we have to change these, sometimes it doesn't always get it, but when it's a simple case like this, it gets it right, and we will accept those. And again, we have now this one to many, and now when I save this, it's saying, okay, I've got to replace all these tables. But that easy, the fact that this is saved doesn't have an asterisk by it or anything. We have now built and implemented that database with those aspects. If I refresh tables, we can see now all those tables are in there. I think, is there not views? Okay, we can look at indexes, foreign keys, maybe. Anyway, we can, constraints. There. So the donor table has this constraint, and okay, the foreign key constraints. I guess we have to go into design and look at the properties if we wanted to see properties of that table, and there's a way to see the foreign key constraints. But we've got them. When you go to add data, I'll just add a few records. I would maybe start with the outside tables. You can't add a gift until you have a donor and a year. So you can't start just adding a gifts, but so I would add a few years, sample data. In real life, the data, I don't know how they're coming from an application and getting put in. We have this edit top 100 rows. They have some old dates in there. And maybe their goal was 10,000 in 1999. Notice since that's a primary key, it's not going to let me, it was not, insert duplicate, the duplicate value is this, violates the primary key constraint. So, and I've asked you to, or suggested that you put in data that will allow you to test. By the way, these records go in as you go along. As I'm typing a record, that little pencil means that record isn't committed. But once I kind of go to the next line, it is. If you need to delete a line, you can right-click and get something there. So I've got 2 years, 1999 and 2000. I don't have to close it, but I am going to do it. And we'll add some donors. Edit. Now notice that we don't want to put in a donor ID. In fact, notice that its null is a little bit, and I can't type anything in there. That's because I've told it to use that as an identity column. It's going to start with 1 and then 2 and then 3. Since that's text, there's nothing yet keeping it to be sure it's integers. We could put that in there. That is not a an important thing. So see how donor ID got 1 assigned. We require these fields. I could show what happens if I didn't do. And I will just do a Smith here. I'm just going to show what happens. I'm not going to put in a first name, even though it's required. This guy is required. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Oh, kind of took it, and it was successfully committed to the database, but it can't tell me what that first name is because it was substituted as a but we said make it a default. If I don't give you a first name, make it effing new. You can't leave it null. All right, so there's records for that. So we had years 1999 and 2000, so we could make up some gifts here. Now we can go on 999, one of the valid years, donor number 1, maybe made a $500 donation. Cha-ching, 2000, donor number 1, made 500 again. All right, if I go to 2001, oh, well, I typed something. Nope, that doesn't work because we have this foreign key constraint, gift year, that 2001 isn't one of the years that's available, so the database is doing this. That's because of this, of the constraint. And those, if you get one of these bad records, press escape a few times, it'll go away. And that's what the database should do. This foreign key constraint should be in there. If you leave it out, you've kind of done it wrong. So those are some gifts. I can't, in this case, have the same donor in the same year. The model makes them collapse all the donations into one, and that's kind of the primary key constraint in the donation table. And so on it goes. Donor 2 could make a donation, and I don't know what else to demo that. This doesn't work because of the primary key, the foreign key constraint that says the donor number needs to be in the donor table. So, okay, it just kind of keeps, that's these relationships going. So now that's, kind of created the table, added some records, got another thing that, kind of talks about queries, but, when you are going to work on some queries, it's nice to put in records that let you get some reasonable assurance that your queries are doing the right thing, but also how to use this, kind of we're almost using a design diagram, but Visio, it's okay, but it gets a little klutzy and hard to do. This one's kind of tuned to, oh, I know where you're headed with this, and designed really to help make databases. Don't forget to make sure you save it at the last. It'll remind you not. All that did was change the format, but especially if you change anything about the structures that you want to keep, that you save, and then they'll propagate down. All right, well, till next time, ta-ta.